deliver the occasional address.
Presiding Chancellor, today we are delighted to welcome as guest speaker the Master of Ormond College and the next Vice-Chancellor of the University of Tasmania, Professor Rufus Black. Professor Black holds degrees in Law and Politics from the University of Melbourne and in Moral Theology from the University of Oxford, where he was a Rhodes Scholar. During his time at Melbourne, Professor Black has served as Master of Ormond College for 9 years, as an Honorary Enterprise Professor in Management and Marketing, and as a Principal Fellow in Philosophy. He is co-founder of the Wade Institute for Entrepreneurship and a Director of the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute, where he has been involved for more than 20 years. He is currently President of Museums Victoria. Professor Black has been Strategic Advisor to the Victorian Secretary for Education and was the founding Chair of the Board of Teach for Australia. His career included a further 9 years at McKinsey & Company, where he was a partner working with clients across Australia and Asia. It is a great pleasure to welcome him to speak at today's ceremony. Thank you.
Chancellor, today I would like to say a brief word about profit and purpose. I start with the observation that global capitalism is dangerously off track. I don't say that as someone who stands in an intellectual tradition that has long critiqued capitalism, but rather as a former McKinsey & Company partner who has lived at the very heart of it, a director of a leading commercial law firm still in the thick of it, and a professor of this university who champions entrepreneurship. It has, I think, derailed in three critical places. First, the promise of progress has been broken. From the end of the Second World War through to 2005, virtually all households in the Western world saw their incomes rise. Indeed, in the decade running to 2005, 98% of households in the Western world saw their lives improve. Since then, the world has changed. As growth has slowed, work has shifted to low-cost locations around the planet, and automation has accelerated. Since 2005, the world has reversed. 65 to 70% of households across the developed world have experienced flat or falling incomes. Australia has seen this trend arrive later than most, but it is here now. Generational frustration at a world where children are poorer than their parents is now finding expressions in the ballot boxes. The second area where we've derailed is our economy works by taking from the natural world, putting harmful materials back into it, and destroying habitat at truly unsustainable rates. And thirdly, the dynamism for the renewal of the global economy is being gravely weakened by the very forces that create it. All the talk of disruption masks the fact that returns to scale and the power of network effects have seen rapid industry consolidation in sector after sector and the concomitant growth of market power by ever larger corporations. The use of that market power has seen new business creation steadily decline. It is the engine of new jobs and new opportunities. And it has reduced the power of competition to produce better outcomes for all. The very corporations that have both created and benefited from this problem need to become central agents to solve it, because governments today around the world neither have sufficient will nor capability to do it. However, corporations won't be merchants of a better future if they continue to operate on the narrow principle that Milton Friedman so influentially laid out when he wrote, "There is one and only one social responsibility of business: to use its resources and engage in activities designed to increase profits, so long as it stays within the rules of the game," which is to say, engages in open and free competition without deception or fraud. If corporations are to operate from a broader sense of responsibility, we as a generation need to rethink them. We need to start that rethinking with a recognition that societies will always need some form of organisation to deliver what we call public goods. Those things that we can only have by collaborating with one another, from healthcare and education to banking services, energy, transport and beyond. With any of these kinds of goods, there's always a question of what kind of organisation delivers them. Is it government or the private sector? There's no right answer to this question. Each mix of public and private providers represents a different political choice about what type of society or country we want to be. Debates about those choices were a driving force of history in the 20th century. We sometimes forget just how recently, even here in Australia, there were government banks, airlines, telecommunications companies, and so on. If government doesn't produce these goods and services, then it could be private organisations, whether profit-making or charitable, partnerships or corporations. Now, when societies give corporations the role to deliver public goods, things we are a society to create, they provide them with very special legal protections. Most particularly, we allow them to have limited liability, a right we give to no private citizen. With some corporations, like banks and telecommunications providers, the nature of the goods or services they offer means that we actually give them a very specific licence to operate. We put very strong regulatory regimes around them to try to make sure they fulfil the purposes of providing banking services or connectivity or whatever it is, within a publicly determined trade-off about the level of risk we are prepared to accept in participating in these activities. The important point here is that the purpose of the corporation is not to provide profit, but to provide, in the broadest sense, public goods. Now, of course, a level of profit is required, but only that investors need to provide the capital the company requires to operate its business, which is far less than the profit that you can possibly make if you go all out for that one goal alone. So if the purpose of corporations is to provide public goods, then of course they need to ensure they provide those goods and services properly. It has been the failure of banks to provide a range of those services properly, from insurance to financial advice, that has contributed to them being in a royal commission, which will ultimately determine whether they deliver the public goods we created them for as a society in the first place. The public goods corporations create are not simply the products they make or the services they provide. They contribute a far broader set of goods, from employment to the state of the environment they leave behind. If we are to fix global capitalism, corporations need to change the way they deliver many of these goods. They need to move away from a model that leaves people behind, which at its core involves a radical investment in the skilling and development of their people, whether they're continuing to work in new and rapidly evolving roles inside them, or being skilled to work in or indeed to create new enterprises. They need to be developing business models like those designed to create a circular economy to ensure the global commons are improved, not depleted. They need to foster new enterprises and spin out non-core businesses rather than hold on to them as a defensive strategy. They need to advocate the liberalisation, not the tightening, of intellectual property laws. They need to open their data sets, not to close them. My experience is that some corporations are increasingly public purpose centred and have a broad sense of stewardship. They demonstrate that purpose centred is possible. However, there is much to do for that to be the norm. But talent speaks loudly in the world today. So everyone here can make a difference to creating that kind of better world where global capitalism works well. They can do it by joining organisations built around a clearly articulated purpose, by starting them, and we need a lot more of this generation starting businesses in Australia. And if you are in an organisation that isn't purpose-centred, change it. Indeed, the very motto of this university makes it clear that a degree from Melbourne is not a licence to run the world, but an obligation to improve it. Thank you.